Today's episode is all about speed. Alon, you're nodding.
Yeah, it is about speed. Because often what happens is that we get in a salesperson, we're super familiar with our own product and the market that it serves. We've been out there ourselves. We hand over the product to the salesperson. We do an okay job of telling them about how great this product is, and if we're really good, we talk about the features and the benefits, and we might even talk about which markets it serves. And we do a very poor job of that in terms of understanding the nuances of the different markets that certain products serve. So my experience over the last 20 odd years in this entrepreneurship space and in business is that products really serve one very defined market. They have multiple markets. They have predominance of a single market. In other words, the majority of the sales goes to a particular part of the market. But the markets are quite nuanced. So as an example, when you're selling office furniture, it's quite logical to think that you would be selling to businesses. But if I think about that a little bit more, well, is it big businesses or small businesses? Is it certain types of businesses? In other words, if our furniture is quite modern and funky, are there certain businesses that are more likely to purchase that? And then, of course, there's people who might purchase the same office furniture for a home office. So now that's the home office market. That's a different nuance, and they might be looking for different things. The fact that it might be a small desk that fits into a home office might be more appropriate for that market, and that's why it's selling there more. So within every single product or service, there are multiple markets, and by you getting clear in your head as to what those markets are, what are the benefits to the markets, the reasons for buying, and then handing that information over to your salespeople in a very deliberate and structured way, that is what this podcast is about.
And that's the voice of Alon Race, CEO of Race Corp. And he mentioned it, 20 years plus building his own business, plus also at the same time assisting entrepreneurs to build their businesses too. And so in the previous episode, we spoke about they need something to sell. In this episode, we are speaking they need someone to sell to.
I suppose the underlying theme for today's podcast is salesperson neglect. It's a big thing. It's a real thing in small businesses. We as entrepreneurs are incredibly busy. Got lots of things going on, lots of screaming clients, lots of screaming staff, lots of screaming suppliers, everyone's screaming, lots of things calling for our attention. And then when we finally have the courage to go and employ a salesperson, we do a really terrible job of handing over properly to them and expect them to succeed. So this podcast is really a reminder to entrepreneurs that salesperson neglect is a real thing, and you need to take responsibility for that, to hand over properly and make sure that they're not neglected and have the highest probability of succeeding. And part of that is for them to understand the product, which we discussed in the last podcast. They need something to sell. So the definition of what I'm selling, understanding that in its deepest form. And then as important is, who do we sell this to? And the subtext of that is, why are they buying? What's the reason for buying? What's the problem we are solving? Or what's the reason for their purchase? And as I said in the opening statement, those reasons are numerous. There's never one reason why a market will buy. There's always numerous reasons. And it's very important that you, as the entrepreneur, take responsibility for understanding those reasons and the different markets and how they're segmented according to those reasons. Then define that in a documented way. Create the training material around that, which doesn't have to be fancy. It could be a couple of PowerPoint slides. And then very deliberately sit down with a new salesperson and say, here's the product, here's what it costs, and now here's the market, and this is why they buy. It's very important to also communicate your most common objections to buying, the reasons why they don't buy. So as important as the reasons they do buy is the reasons they don't buy. And it could be because your competitor has got a better product, has a cheaper product, has a faster product. And then it puts you in the mind of the salesperson, because if you are honest in that handover and you say, well, the objections to buying from us are that we're very expensive. And there isn't a but after that statement. If you're not saying, but we're expensive, but we are higher quality, or we last longer, or whatever the case may be, if you're not taking that to the next level, then you aren't arming your salesperson with the objections that they are likely to receive from that particular market. And remember, there are multiple markets, and so you might have different objection sets in those different markets. So we started off talking about this being a podcast about speed, the speed of transfer of information, so that your salesperson has the highest probability of success. If they are successful, you are successful. If they are successful, there's more money for you to then employ a second salesperson, and then they too will become successful, and then a third and a fourth. And the whole idea here is to build a sales team.
So as one is doing this, what are some of the points of resistance that you have experienced yourself or seen in other businesses as this kind of handover is taking place? You've emphasized that it needs to be clearly defined. It needs to be documented in a particular kind of way. It needs to be quite thorough in that documentation.
So we need a bit of training. So there's the documentation and then there's the training. I might document it 2 pages. This is a product. This is market A. These are the common objections. This is how you resolve those objections.
Yeah, it's not just a transfer of information. So training is when you look at case studies and analyze them together, or perhaps look at different scenarios and perhaps even simulate them. And so that's the training component that you're referring to here.
Correct. But it's providing as much detail as possible in there so that they succeed.
We've done that now. Is there another step that I've missed?
There is. In our world, we test it. We do assessments around it. So it's very easy for me to say, train you, and you might be nodding, might be thinking about what's for lunch, and you might be thinking about the fight you had with your wife this morning. You don't know what's being absorbed. I think if you're really thorough, it goes to, well, here's the assessment, a closed book or open book assessment. Could be in the form of a quiz, a multiple choice quiz. It could be in the form of a case study, and it could be in the form of a live simulation, that you assess with a rubric. It sounds quite overkill. And many entrepreneurs are thinking, well, that's a bit weird. There are only 7 of us, and why would I be going through all this effort? The reason you do that is because you're a long-term thinker and you want to scale your business.
And you don't want to neglect your sales team.
Exactly. And you want to make sure that they succeed. And if they succeed, you succeed. That's the reason why you do it and put the investment into creating that additional step.
Well, it makes no sense to me that you would build a business, structure it in a certain kind of a way, invest in your ops, invest in the ability to deliver something, and then not go the extra mile for the people that are bringing the business in.
Gareth, you'd be surprised. I know it might surprise you, but it doesn't surprise me. And my experience is that more than 90% of small business do not train their salespeople adequately. And probably around 50% don't train their salespeople at all. They just hand over stuff. They just literally throw them in the deep end. And they're quite proud of it. They go, we'll just throw you in the deep end. You've got to catch up, beating the chest. The Wild West here. You've got to adapt quickly to this environment. That's fine, but not to the salespeople. They need to know what they're selling.
Can we circle back onto that question about resistance? One thing, for example, that comes to mind is a resistant salesperson. Someone that says, no, I know how to sell. You don't need to tell me how to sell. Just give me the product or give me the info sheet and I'll go and sell. What are some of those resistance factors? And is that one of them? I'm assuming it must be.
If you get a salesperson from your industry, they might have a certain way of selling to your clients because they come from your industry. So it might be a competitor. That can be a positive thing and it could be a negative thing. And you need to be constantly aware of both of those possibilities. The positive is that they understand the client's needs already because they've already built relationships with them and they understand what's important to that client and they sell their product to that client. But your product might be different to your competitor's product. You might want to be known in the market for different things. So they might come from a competitor that is more expensive, has a more expensive product, or they might come from a competitor that has got a much bigger brand. And so your product in that example might be defined differently in the market, that it's much faster and it's more modern. And if they've gone out into their previous market and are coming now with your product and are selling in the same way, that might be problematic. It's important just to be aware of that. I don't think it's a huge problem, but it could cause issues and you need to be aware of that. But I think there is also the resistance from the salesperson. Salespeople generally want to hit the road running as quickly as possible. It's a rare salesperson that is that serious about getting to understand the product and the market before they go out, that has got the self-discipline to do that. They generally come into an interview. You go, come with a database of 100 CEOs. I can call them right now. They go off half-cocked, so to speak, into the market, leaning on their relationship more than what the product can do. And they generally find resistance from the client who is really there to look after their own interests. So the fact that you now have moved as a salesperson from one company to the next and now coming with product B doesn't really mean that I'm going to be so quick to change over to product B. When the salesperson knows that and that there's still resistance from the client, they might be more open to making sure that they don't go off half-cocked. They understand the product that they're now selling and they understand the objections relating to that product. Because every product might have different objections, even in the same market. Because simple example is one product's expensive, the other one's cheap. One's got 10 features, 8 of which I never will use. The other's got 4 features, all of which I will use. So you're going to have different objections. Understanding the objections, if I had to say what is the most important thing for a salesperson to go out with into a new market, it's to understand the most common objections and then how to navigate those objections, how to overcome those.
I would imagine that if you have a salesperson that has now gone into the market in this style, in this way, that it then creates more resistance within the entrepreneur when someone says, oh, let's get another salesperson. And so there's this not so virtuous cycle, a terrible cycle, downward spiral of, but look at what happened when we did it before.
Yes.
And so this idea of building a sales team, but then making sure that there's a very defined market, and what we've spoken about earlier in the podcast, is such an important thing to do, because the knock-on effect of that is that you may never want to build a sales team because you're not doing it right.
Yeah. And I see with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm hoping none of them are listening right now, but I've seen with a lot of entrepreneurs that at some level there's a piece of glee in that statement, because if you're the best salesperson, that's a great ego stroke. If you're the one who knows how to sell the product and you're the one who's bringing home the bacon, so to speak, into the business, and you're the one who's ringing the bell and telling your small team how wonderful you are, that you've just got this big client, that ego stroke is quite addictive. And now you're bringing in somebody else, and if they fail, it reinforces your dominance as the top salesperson. As I've said across all the different series, ego is a dangerous thing in business. You should want somebody to sell more than you, and you want to have lots of great salespeople who are better than you. And so by holding on to the glory of being the top salesperson, by not handing over properly, you're shooting yourself in the foot, but you're feeling very good about yourself when you do it. And that's really why you remain small.
Let's summarize. Let's go back to the beginning. We're talking they need someone to sell to. And that begins with a process. And that process is defining, documenting, training, which we discussed and expanded on, and then handing over. And that really leads to speed to market for the sales team and lowered resistance. Is that what we've said today?
Yes, that's what we've said today. But all of that requires effort, upfront effort, planning, documentation, and the normal cry from the entrepreneurs, I'm too busy to do that. And my response to the entrepreneurs that I mentor in that space is, are you too busy to grow? Are you too busy to be successful? Are you too busy dealing with the issues of an unprofitable business? Because if you understand that it is that binary in my mind, you've got a successful salesperson who's then growing to a sales team who's becoming more successful. That is the pathway of a growing, profitable business. When you have just you who knows everything or think you know everything, and you're the one who's selling, and you're one who's getting the pat on the back when you're bringing home the bacon, and you then try to get a salesperson, don't hand over properly, and then go, you see, if you want to do something properly, you got to do it yourself. The client only wants to see me. If you've got that mindset, you remain small. And invariably, you become exhausted, and invariably, you give up, and invariably, you lose your business. And that's in the stats of small business. 96% of them fail.
Are you too busy to think successfully? Thank you very much, Alon. And that concludes this particular episode. Make sure to follow RaceCorp on your favorite social media platforms, where you'll find updates about this series and other series that RaceCorp will be releasing. Join us in the next episode of this series, where we'll be discussing They Need to Earn Commission. I'm Gareth Armstrong, and this has been a Razor's Edge podcast.